Hi, this is Kristen. Today I'm going to be talking about education in the Philippines, specifically public education. So let's get started. Since we're dealing with public education systems, I went ahead and jumped to Philippines as a Spanish colony, as those would be the first formal schools brought into the Philippines. That's not to say they didn't have some schooling beforehand, but it was much more informal. So education as a Spanish colony was mostly for Spanish citizens and for the mestizo population later on. The Catholic Church, instead of the Spanish government, was in charge of local education at a small scale, so the towns and the villages. And those were set up by friars and priests in their small parishes and taught your basic education with arithmetic, some writing, a little bit of reading. The friars and priests actually learned the local languages and dialects and really didn't teach Spanish to the local population. In 1863, the Spanish government did create a free public education system. It was one of the first, if not the first, in Asia. It was still based on the Catholic faith and still run by friars and priests, but at least it was free for all levels, even village level and elementary through secondary. At the end of the Philippine-American War in 1899, Americans seized control of the Philippines, and they considered education a top priority. The U.S. soldiers that were already stationed here became the first teachers, but they were quickly followed in 1901 by a group of American missionaries called the Thomasites, because they arrived to the Philippines on the USS Thomas. They taught 3 levels of education, all in English. They really kind of frowned upon the local dialects and languages. They taught elementary, which was 4 primary years and 3 intermediate, and secondary high school. The tertiary or college level was really offered in America for the kind of bright young men that they wanted to see eventually get into government and become good citizens of the Philippines. Japan occupied the Philippines from 1942 to 1945, and I pretty much only wanted to put this in because they ended up changing the language once again and really pushed their culture as well. During this time, because English was banned, Filipinos fell back on their local dialects and languages, and they really pushed to make one language for the whole Philippines. There are, depending who you ask, 120 to 187 languages here. And I put this map in just to show you the wide variety of languages. The Philippines from north to south is about as long as the continental US north to south. So it's fairly big, but that's a lot of ocean in between each islands. So language is something, even to this day, they still have a problem with their education system. After gaining their independence and to help counteract the American cultural influence among Filipinos, President Quezon greatly encouraged the revival of native culture and desirable Filipino values in his very famous Code of Ethics, which was to be taught in all the schools. Primary schools were to be taught in their local dialect or vernacular, with English being taught still formally and Tagalog, the language they were hoping to achieve as an official language one day, to be taught informally. In 1971, President Ferdinand Marcos officially changed the Department of Education to the Department of Education and Culture because he wanted to focus the schooling more on technical and economic development. Some people believe this is when they really started gearing up Filipinos to export local labor. The closest thing I found in the Philippines for a free lunch program was actually a USAID program in 1972 called the Nutriban program. It was to combat severe malnutrition in children, school-age children, I believe, of all ages. It was a locally made bread bun that could use local ingredients such as moringa or malunggay powder, squash or pumpkin, banana powder, and eggs. That way they could also fortify it with some American vitamins and really help combat childhood malnutrition. It worked so well they were able to phase it out, I believe, in the early 80s. After the fall of the Marcos regime, the Philippine government came together in 1986, and by 1987 they had a new constitution, and in that they made primary school compulsory, which was age 6 to 7 until age 12 to 13, and offered free secondary schooling. Both Tagalog and English were officially taught in secondary schools, the local dialect still being used for primary schools. If you ask around, many Filipinos that were in the school system from the late 80s to the early 2000s made it through primary school that was compulsory, but ended up dropping out at some point during their what they call high school, their secondary program. They often cite that even though the school is free, they couldn't pay for the uniforms or supplies needed. And also, they would go out and find an informal job to help support the family. In 2013, President Aquino announced the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013, also called the K-12 Act. If you go to the K-12 website, it says, until this law's enactment, the Philippines was the only country in Asia and only one of 3 countries worldwide, together with Angola and Djibouti, with a 10-year pre-university cycle. So thus, by law, education is now compulsory for 13 years. That's kindergarten through grades 12, and is grouped into 3 levels. Elementary school, which is kindergarten through grade 6, junior high school, which are grades 7 through 10, and high school, which are grades 11 and 12. When I asked around about current sessions, I got some different answers, I guess from different schools, but I know the elementary and kindergarten run half-day programs, but they run 2 programs per day to get all of the students in there because there's just so many kids that are trying to get in this small amount of schools. So for instance, many schools will open at 5:30 or 6 a.m. and then the day finishes at noon. Then they take a lunch break, and then the same teachers go back and teach another set of children from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. There are students in the same families where one has the morning session and one has the afternoon session, and they kind of have different sleeping schedules and different school schedules just so that everyone can get into school with the small amount of schools that they have for such a large population. One of the things the Philippine government was so excited about this new K-12 program was that students would now come out of the education program ready to work without needing further tertiary education. So this brings us to the high school. The last 2 years of the public education system here in the Philippines, so the 11th grade and 12th grade, are considered high school and are now divided into 3 main tracks of interest. Those that want to focus on academic studies, those that want to focus on sports and arts, which, as an aside, I'm amazed that they put those 2 together, and then something called TVET, which is Technical, Vocational, and Educational Training. The academic segment of high school is broken down into another 3 areas. There's BAM, Business, Accounting, and Management. There's HES, which consists of Humanities, Education, and Social Sciences. And then STEM, as we all know, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. TVET is broken down into 4 areas: Home Economics, Agri-Fisheries, Industrial Arts, and Information Communication Technology, which is also broken down into another 2 programs, Animation and Programming. So as far as education programs go, this one is still pretty new. The high school only really was implemented in the year 2016-2017. So many people are already questioning its progress. Parents worry about the hidden costs of 3 more years of free education because, as I said, you have to have a uniform that you supply as well as some supplies. The Philippine government does have a voucher program that people can apply for, but people note that they're already missing out on some informal work that the kids could do and bring in some income to the families. The second issue is language. As some classes traditionally taught in English, such as math and science, have stayed that way, but other courses are now taught in Tagalog or even the local dialect. The Philippines officially lists Tagalog and English as national languages, but both of these are mainly used in the North Island of Luzon, where the capital Manila lies. Some Filipinos see English as leftover colonialism and want to get rid of it. Other people not living in Luzon are angry that Tagalog was chosen over their own dialect and don't want to use that. Though it's essential to preserve the cultural languages throughout the country, some Filipinos also worry that their child loses hours a day if they're not taught completely in English or even Tagalog. Another issue with the K to 12 Act I found interesting was that with the previous system of 10 years of education, students would finish around age 16 or 17. So they were not legally allowed to work for another year, 18 months. So while they could work part-time informally, they were kind of left on their own to find another way of education. So many actually ended up going and searching either technological school or tertiary formal education in university. In 2017, President Duterte announced that tertiary education would also become free for students, but from what I've understood, this has not yet taken effect. This may be due to the lack of funding, school space, and qualified teachers now that they're struggling to find to fill the positions for the K to 12 Act. There have also been quite a few incidences where um, funds set aside for a specific school program have kind of just disappeared, either on a local level or even a national level. While it may be a bit of a bumpy start, I personally think it's a good effort to finally get the Philippines up with pretty much the rest of the world having 13 years of free public education for the entire country. I'm hopeful that with due diligence and so many people that are passionate about the education system, that we'll really begin to see progress from this K to 12 Act over the next few years. Thank you. I guess the following slide I have listed my sources. If you want any more information, just let me know. Otherwise, see you in class. Bye.